My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm a 34-year-old elementary school teacher from Pacoima, California. And what I'm about to tell you is not something I rehearsed. It is the thing that happened to me, inside my body and outside of it, on a Sunday morning when I died in the middle of a church service while my pastor kept preaching. He didn't stop. Denise was sitting next to me when I went down. She felt me slump. She turned, said my name. When I didn't answer, she, a nurse, dropped to her knees on that sanctuary floor and started CPR while someone else dialed 911. The congregation shifted, people stood, and at the front of the room, behind the altar he treated like a throne, Junior Bennett kept right on preaching. His voice didn't waver. His microphone kept amplifying his words across the room while a woman was dying in his pews. Hold that image. We're going to come back to it. Because what happened after I stopped breathing, what I saw, what I was shown, is the reason that image matters. And when I tell you what Jesus revealed to me in those 8 minutes, the image of that man at that pulpit is going to make an entirely different kind of sense. But first, you need to understand who Junior Bennett was and why I trusted him with everything. Junior Andrew Bennett built something real in Pacoima. Breakthrough International Ministries wasn't a small church with folding chairs and paper bulletins. It was a production, multiple services, a pastoral team, a following that extended online. Bennett had a gift that is difficult to describe unless you've stood in a room where it was operating. He walked out and the atmosphere changed, not because of music or lighting, because of him. His prayers felt like they went somewhere. His declarations felt like they landed. In that world, Bennett was more than a pastor. He was a prophet, the word used literally, not as a title of affection. He claimed direct access to God's voice. He spoke specific things over people, private things, and they seemed to come true. The congregation learned to wait for those words. They gave generously because he said, "Generosity opened heaven over your household." They volunteered early and stayed late because that was what faithfulness looked like. The church became a total ecosystem, social, spiritual, emotional. If you were embedded in Breakthrough, your whole life organized around it. That was exactly where I was. 4 years in. 4 years of Sunday mornings and midweek services and prayer calls and conference weekends. I was the person who arranged children's ministry chairs before anyone else arrived. I bought supplies for the kids' classrooms out of my own pocket when the budget ran short. I tithed faithfully, even in months when my teacher's salary made that hard. I believed that faithfulness in small things opened larger doors. And every time I showed up and gave and served, the community reflected that back to me as confirmation. You belong here. You are seen. You are doing what God called you to do. Denise had been attending Breakthrough for 6 months before I agreed to visit. The first Sunday I walked in, I felt something I didn't have language for, a sense of arrival. Like I had been looking for something I couldn't name, and this was it. The first time Bennett prayed over me specifically, I went home and wept until my chest ached. He named things I had never told anyone. He spoke into a wound I'd been carrying since I was 19. The only explanation that made sense was that God had told him, that God had seen me, that this church was where I was supposed to be. That was the hook. It held for 4 years. I never questioned Bennett. Not once, not seriously. If something felt uncomfortable, I filed it under conviction, the word the community used when God was correcting you. If the teaching felt controlling, I filed that under submission, which was positioned as a virtue. If I saw something in someone else's situation that troubled me, I filed it under not my place to judge. The language of the church was so complete, it had an answer for every doubt before the doubt could fully form. I wasn't just in a church. I was inside a total explanatory system, and I didn't know it. Because inside that system, everything felt like faith. The Sunday it happened, I was in my usual spot, 3rd row, left side, next to Denise. The service was running long. Bennett was deep into a message about authority and obedience. I felt lightheaded and thought I should have eaten more at breakfast. That is the last thing I remember thinking. What came after happened in two realities simultaneously. In the physical room, I lost consciousness. Denise lowered me to the floor, started compressions. Paramedics arrived within 7 minutes. My heart stopped for approximately 8 minutes. A cardiac event with no prior history to explain it. No warning. No diagnosis that satisfied anyone with a medical degree. But outside my physical body, something entirely different was unfolding. The first thing I noticed was that the sound was wrong. The ambient church noise was receding. Not the way sound fades when you walk away from it, but draining. Like someone pulling the frequency out of the room. In the silence that replaced it, I became aware that I was above. I was looking down. I could see Denise on her knees beside my body. I could see my own face, slack, pale, unfamiliar the way your face always is when you see it from outside. I could see the congregation gathered in a radius around us, and I could see Bennett at the front of the room. He had turned toward the commotion, then turned back. And something about the way he turned back cannot be explained as normal human behavior. There was nothing in his posture, no alarm, no interruption. He returned to his pulpit as though what was happening on that floor was not his concern. That registered in me even from where I was suspended above it. But I couldn't hold it, because something was pulling me through, in a direction that doesn't have a name, toward something immense. The church disappeared. I was somewhere else. I have tried to describe this place, and the words always come back diminished. It had no walls, but didn't feel like open space. It had a quality of presence, as though the place itself was aware of me. The light wasn't the light I knew. It didn't come from a source. It was more like everything was made of it. He was already there. I didn't see him arrive. He was present the way the light was present, as an attribute of the place and also as a person. The knowing was immediate, not constructed from any image I carried of what Jesus looked like. My being knew his being the way a note knows the chord it belongs to. Instantly, without argument. He knew me. Not in the general way people say God knows everyone. Intimately. The way someone knows the particular texture of your life, your private fears, the wounds you've learned to work around. He knew about the 19-year-old wound Bennett had named in that prayer. He knew the shape of the loneliness that made Breakthrough feel like a rival. He knew the years I had spent trying to be good enough to deserve the belonging I felt inside that church. He addressed those things first. Not the church, not Bennett, me. This catches people off guard when I tell this story. They expect the NDE to jump straight to the revelation. It didn't. He was unhurried about me, about my fear that I had been wrong to trust so completely, about the way I had handed my spiritual formation to another human being and called it obedience. He didn't condemn me for that. He grieved with me over it. There is a difference between condemnation and grief, and I felt that difference completely. The peace he radiated was something I had no prior experience of. I keep coming back to that sentence because it changes everything. I had worshipped inside Breakthrough for 4 years. I had experienced what I believed was God's presence, during powerful services, during declarations, during music that moved me. But standing before Jesus, I recognized that I had never once felt what I was feeling now. Not even close. The thing inside Breakthrough that felt like God's presence was something else entirely. And he hadn't told me that yet. I just knew it. The way you know something when the real version finally arrives. Then he showed me. The threshold space didn't change. I didn't go anywhere. But I was made to see. Like an entirely new depth of vision opened up. And what I saw through it was Breakthrough Church as it existed in the spirit. Not as it looked from my third-row pew. What I saw was what the building actually was, what was being hosted inside it, what had been given permission to operate there through years of misdirected worship. I saw what Bennett's declarations had been feeding, not God. Something that received the spiritual energy of hundreds of devoted people and used it for entirely different purposes. And then I saw Bennett. This is the part I resisted speaking for months after I came back. I knew how it would land. But I am going to tell you exactly what I was shown, because the events of January 14th, 2026 mean I am no longer speaking only from personal experience. I am speaking from spiritual truth that was subsequently confirmed by earthly documentation. I saw Bennett's hidden life, not symbolically, not in vague imagery. I saw the specific nature of what he was doing in the dark, the predatory use of spiritual authority, the way vulnerable people had been isolated and targeted, the harm being done to those who came trusting he was sent by God. And in that moment, I understood. The prayer he had prayed over me that first time, the one that named things I had never told anyone, the one that felt like God seeing me, that gift had been real once, but it had long since been turned toward appetite rather than love. What looked like prophecy had become a tool of selection. He didn't find me because God sent him. He found me because I was exactly the kind of person who could be kept. Jesus did not show me this with anger. What I felt from him while I watched was grief. The deep grief of someone watching a person he loved destroy himself and others simultaneously. He said something to me. The words I will give you are approximate. The communication wasn't entirely verbal, it was meaning placed directly into understanding. But the content was this: a shepherd who devours the flock was not sent by the shepherd, and he said it with a sorrow that was almost unbearable to be near. I need to be careful about what I mean by demonic possession. The horror movie version had nothing to do with what I was shown. What I was shown was subtler and more frightening. It was the systematic inversion of spiritual authority. A man who had been given genuine gifts, who had perhaps once been oriented toward God, who had let those gifts become instruments of his own appetite. And as that inversion deepened, what moved into the vacuum was fed by the church itself. The worship, the declarations, the hunger of hundreds of sincere people, all of it misdirected. All of it received by something that was not what they thought they were offering it to. That is what was behind the altar. He didn't give me a mandate. He showed me, and he held me while I processed it, and he gave me the capacity to carry it without breaking. Then he asked. There was no pressure, no dramatic pulling in opposite directions. He made it known that I had a choice, genuinely mine. I could stay, or I could return. If I stayed, what I'd been shown stayed with me. If I returned, it came back with me into the world. I knew immediately. If there were people still inside that building, people like me, people who had given everything to something that was using them, the only thing of value I had was what I had just been shown. I chose to return. And then I was falling back into weight. The first thing I noticed was the sound again. The worship music was playing. The congregation regrouping. Music that had moved me every Sunday for 4 years now hit my ears differently. Not evil, just hollow. The hum of a machine running towards something other than what its operators believed. I was intubated by the time full consciousness returned. I didn't speak until the hospital. I was home within 3 days. Because the cardiac event, as medically impossible as this was to explain, left no traceable damage, no underlying conditions found, no lasting trauma, nothing that made sense on a medical chart. 48 hours after I got home, I told Denise. I tried to tell the story in order: the floating, the light, the presence, the peace. Denise sat with her hands folded and her face very still, the way she goes still when she is processing something she doesn't want to accept. When I reached Bennett, when I told her what I had been shown, she said, "Rachel," not a sentence, a boundary. She loved me, but I was describing something that threatened everything: her church, her community, her spiritual authority. And I was asking her to consider that the foundation of all of it was not what we thought. She didn't say she didn't believe me. She said she was worried about me, that NDE experiences could produce distorted perceptions, that I needed to speak with someone spiritually mature. That was the first conversation. the others were shorter. When I tried reaching others in the congregation, one woman from children's ministry went to Bennett's inner circle. The message that came back was clear. Rachel Monroe had experienced a spiritual deception during her near-death event. What she claimed was not a revelation. It was a counterfeit designed to discredit God's anointed. I needed deliverance. I needed to repent of the spirit of accusation and submit to pastoral covering. They offered me deliverance for reporting a demonic presence. The language that should protect people had been reversed to protect the institution. Conviction, covering, alignment, deliverance. The same vocabulary that once felt like spiritual safety became the mechanism for silencing me. I stopped attending Breakthrough. I sat with what I knew in the particular loneliness of carrying a truth the people it was meant for would not receive. Then came January 14th, 2026. Junior Andrew Bennett was arrested in Pinon Hills, California. Multiple counts of child sex abuse. The charges were not vague. The documentation was real. News coverage spread within hours. Former members began speaking publicly. People who had stayed silent for years, and what they described, the patterns, the specific nature of the harm done in the hidden places of his authority, the way his position had been used to access and exploit the most vulnerable, aligned with what I had been shown in 8 minutes when my heart wasn't beating. Denise called me. She didn't speak when I answered. Then she said my name, just Rachel, but with a completely different tone than the last time. Not a boundary, a crossing. She said she was sorry, not elaborately, just, I'm sorry. I told her I'd been praying for her since the moment I came back. Not that she'd believe me, but that she'd be okay through whatever was coming. Because I knew something was coming. I didn't know when or what exactly, but I knew. I am not celebrating his arrest. There is something wrong with a faith that celebrates the exposure of evil rather than mourning the harm it caused. Bennett harmed real people, children, families. Every prophecy he ever spoke over someone's life is now cast in shadow. The spiritual investment of hundreds of sincere people, entangled with what was revealed. That is not something to celebrate. That is something to grieve. I think about people still inside buildings like that one. Not Breakthrough specifically. That building is not what it was. I mean the others. The ones where a man with a microphone has positioned himself as the exclusive channel between his congregation and God. Where questions are named sin. Where doubt is called spiritual weakness. Where leaving is called rebellion. There are more than one. And the people inside are not foolish. They are faithful. That's what makes them vulnerable. That's what gets exploited. Discernment is not optional. The peace I felt in that threshold space, the peace I immediately recognized I had never felt inside Breakthrough despite 4 years of trying, is itself a standard. That peace is not manufactured. It cannot be performed. And if you have spent years in a spiritual community without ever once feeling it, it is worth asking yourself why. A shepherd sent by God does not need you to stop thinking to believe in him. He is not threatened by your questions. He does not position himself between you and the peace that passes understanding. He leads you toward it. I came back carrying something I didn't choose and cannot put down. I am still carrying it. And the only thing that makes it bearable is telling the truth about what I was shown and trusting that someone who needs to hear it will. If this stayed with you, if it made you question something you've been afraid to question, stay with that. Don't move past it too quickly. And if you want to hear more testimonies like mine, stories of people who came back changed, they're here on this channel. Subscribe so you don't miss them, because the next one may be exactly what you didn't know you were looking for.